This is the final episode of Season 6, and while I am excitedly working on Season 7, I would like to ask each and every listener to go and give the podcast 5 stars. Ratings and comments go a long way toward the algorithm finding new listeners. Your support really does mean the world to me. After you pause and leave your 5-star rating, I hope you enjoy this episode, which is my personal favorite of the season. In December 2001, Osama Bin Laden, the head of Qaeda, the world's premier terrorist organization, slipped the noose in Tora Bora, Afghanistan. At a congressional hearing, Donald Rumsfeld revealed that America was back at square one in its effort to bring the terrorists to justice, stating for the record, he may be dead, he may be seriously wounded, he may be in Afghanistan, or he may be somewhere else. For nearly 10 years, Bin Laden remained hidden in Abbotabad, Pakistan, surrounded by several wives and his most trusted bodyguards. Had he chosen, Bin Laden might have lived out the rest of his natural life in comfort. But the intervening decade revealed that the terrorist wasn't satisfied with simply escaping alive. In the aftermath of the African embassy bombings in 1998, he handed a pistol to his bodyguard and instructed him, "I want to be shot twice in the head rather than being taken prisoner. I must never be taken alive by the Americans," he continued. "I want to die a martyr, and above all, never end up in prison. Martyrdom rather than captivity." Although he expected America to once again back down from the challenge, 9/11 instead precipitated the war on terror, a massive overreaction that reshaped nearly every facet of American life. The United States put boots on the ground, not only in Afghanistan, but in 75 other nations. Direct or indirect regime change in Iraq, Libya, Egypt, and Syria suggested that Bin Laden was right. America was at war with Islam. Yet rather than embracing a detached philosophy towards his jihad, Bin Laden stewed in hiding, increasingly frustrated by the celebrity status of his ISIS-linked lieutenant, al-Zakari. Having escaped capture, absolute secrecy became essential to staying alive. But that secrecy also left Bin Laden struggling to remain relevant in a world he could no longer personally engage with. Historian Peter Bergen, my primary source for this series, writes that during the first weeks of 2011, Bin Laden was in a state of agitation. History, it seemed, was passing him by. Bin Laden was perplexed by how to respond to the momentous events of the Arab Spring uprisings across the Middle East, which had seemed to come out of nowhere at the beginning of the year. In his last months of his life, he was deeply worried about Al-Qaeda's image, which he thought was being tarnished by allied groups who were killing Muslim civilians for no discernible strategic purpose, or who were flirting with using chemical weapons. So badly tarnished had the Al-Qaeda brand become that he even considered changing the name of his group. He was seeking a kinder, gentler Al-Qaeda. Two of history's best-known maxims ultimately proved to be Bin Laden's undoing. First, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Second, success goes to your head. Combined, they create a dangerous sense of self-importance, one that makes it impossible to step aside and let others carry on without you. Bergen reveals that, far from the prevailing image of the isolated man in a cave, Bin Laden tried to be a hands-on manager of Al-Qaeda, even a micromanager. But every attempt to reestablish his relevance left behind another clue. A trail in the cat and mouse game that would ultimately end in an unmarked watery grave. The tapes Bin Laden continually released were dissected for even the smallest details. German ornithologists analyzed the birds chirping in the background. Leading geologists and botanists studied zoomed-in images, searching for clues in the rocks and vegetation. Swiss scientists used computer models to verify authenticity, while psychiatrists offered diagnosis based on his mannerisms. Despite it all, Bin Laden remained hidden in one of Pakistan's largest cities, a well-paid ally in America's war on terror. On the night of September 11, 2001, President George W. Bush vowed to kill the architect of the attacks. Nearly a decade later, at 1 a.m. local Pakistani time, President Barack Obama sat in the Situation Room, watching as SEAL Team 6 raided the compound they believed housed the terrorist leader. Only after hearing the code word Geronimo did they celebrate. After all, this was an unauthorized raid inside a nuclear power that had steadfastly refused to allow American military operations on its soil. If the intelligence was wrong, the Obama administration risked carrying out what could be viewed as an act of war against its own ally. In this episode, we'll examine the evidence that led to the decision to risk the political fallout, the final years of Bin Laden's life, and the heroic execution of a mission that seemed doomed from the very beginning. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon the terrorist Osama Bin Laden. Episode number 7, The Hunt for Bin Laden. Pakistan and America have long been frenemies. The Howard H. Baker Jr. Center for Public Policy notes that the relationship between the two nations has risen and fallen according to the saliency of American security interests in the region. Their cooperation with the United States often led America to overlook major points of contention, especially Pakistan's relationship with India, a nation it has fought 4 major wars with since 1947. Although the two countries maintained a cooperative relationship, Pakistan's interests diverged sharply from Washington's when it came to the Taliban, who provided Pakistan with strategic security along its western border. That relationship had been forged after America abandoned the region following the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan. Historians Abdul Rahmani and Jason Hawke argue that the decision left Afghans in grips of Islamist radicalization, leading to a civil war, the rise of the Taliban movement, and finally a terrorist safe haven for al-Qaeda that had global consequences on September 11, 2001. The lesson was not lost on Defense Secretary Robert Gates, who testified before Congress in 2007 that one of the lessons is that if we abandon these countries, there's a very real possibility that we will pay a higher price in the end. America had funneled aid and support for Afghanistan through Pakistan, inadvertently teaching Islamabad that Washington's carefully worded security promises could not always be trusted. By cultivating ties with the Taliban, Pakistan was able to shift the majority of its sizable armed forces towards its shared border with India. Unfortunately, the Taliban's ideology was so corrosive and extreme that merely looking the other way wasn't enough. In an effort to coexist with a group that shared few of its values, Pakistan created the federally administered tribal areas. During the 1980s, anti-Soviet jihadists had used the semi-autonomous region as a staging ground for operations in Afghanistan. After 9/11, defeated Taliban fighters retreated there to seek refuge. In exchange for billions in economic and military aid, President Pervez Musharraf, a former army chief, promised unstinted cooperation in the war on terror. Yet Pakistan steadfastly refused to allow the United States to conduct military operations on its sovereign soil. Such an action was viewed as too much for the Pakistani public, a move that risked turning an ally into an enemy. Musharraf, who had seized power in a military coup, fit the description once used by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt for dictator Rafael Trujillo. He may be a bastard, but he's our bastard. Musharraf himself survived 2 assassination attempts by Islamic extremists, in part because of his perceived closeness to America. Caught between a rock and a hard place, he played a dangerous double game while one unnamed American official threatened to bomb Pakistan back to the Stone Age if he opposed the war on terror. U.S. Ambassador to Pakistan Ann Patterson informed her superiors in 2009 that after 9/11, then President Musharraf made a strategic shift to abandon the Taliban and support the U.S. in the war on terror. But neither side believes the other has lived up to expectations flowing from that decision. The relationship is one of codependency, we grudgingly admit. Pakistan knows the U.S. cannot afford to walk away. The U.S. knows Pakistan cannot survive without our support. Musharraf allowed drones to launch from bases inside Pakistan, tolerating the nearly 3,000 deaths caused by Predator Hellfire missile strikes. Beyond that, however, much of his cooperation amounted to little more than window dressing. Counter-terrorism operations selectively targeted groups threatening Pakistan itself, rather than those fueling the growing insurgency in Afghanistan. When the New York Times revealed in 2008 that President George W. Bush had signed secret orders authorizing unilateral ground assaults, Pakistan's army chief responded with a statement that quickly went viral. The sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country will be defended at all cost. Unfortunately, the best intelligence suggested that bin Laden had found sanctuary somewhere within the federally administered tribal areas, perhaps even crossing borders regularly to throw trackers off his scent. The hunters had the right country, but they were searching the wrong place. Instead of hiding in a crude hut along the rugged borderlands, bin Laden had settled into a compound just 50 miles from Pakistan's capital, in the medium-sized city of Abbotabad. With the help of local warlords, Osama bin Laden initially found refuge in Pakistan's federally administered tribal areas, moving between various safe houses for roughly a year and a half. In 2003, he relocated to Harjapur, a city near Pakistan's capital. During this period, he lived a relatively normal life, at least normal for an on-the-run, multi-millionaire polygamous terrorist. His youngest wife, Amal al-Sadeh, gave birth to 4 children during this time, with 2 of the deliveries taking place in government-run hospitals. To avoid dangerous questions, her handlers introduced her to doctors as a woman who was both deaf and dumb. The amount of time bin Laden spent in and around major cities led David Ignatius of the Washington Post to argue that it strains any credulity that he could have lived in 5 different houses in Pakistan, that his wife gave birth to 4 children, 2 in government hospitals, and there wasn't some official knowledge. Pakistan is a place where you don't move down the street without people seeing and knowing and asking questions and making inquiries. In 2004, bin Laden's handlers began construction on what would become his final hideout, a sprawling 3-story compound on the outskirts of Abbotabad. Built between 2003 and 2005, it stood on a dirt road in Bilal town, less than a mile from Pakistan's prestigious Pakistan Military Academy at Kakul, and close to local police and intelligence infrastructure. To outsiders, the location seemed almost absurd for the world's most wanted man, hiding in plain sight near the heart of Pakistan's military elite. One architect later described the building as surprisingly permanent and surprisingly urban, the kind of structure destined to join Saddam Hussein's final hideout among history's most infamous examples of hideout architecture. Known locally as the Waziristan Mansion, the property sat on a plot far larger than neighboring homes. Purchased in sections for roughly $48,000 by Bin Laden's trusted courier, the land eventually became a 38,000 square foot compound surrounded by 18-foot concrete walls topped with barbed wire. 2 heavy security gates, towering privacy walls, and a suspicious lack of windows all pointed to a singular purpose: keeping prying eyes out. The top floor balcony, where Bin Laden is believed to have spent much of his time, was enclosed by more than 6 feet of solid concrete. No phone or internet lines ran to the house, yet satellite dishes sat on the roof. Though often described as a mansion, U.S. officials estimated the compound's value at roughly $1 million, while local real estate agents placed it closer to $250,000. Originally designed as a 2-story residence, the illegally constructed 3rd floor became Bin Laden's private quarters. Security cameras, thick walls, and an inward-facing layout made it nearly impossible to observe the property from the outside. From the street, the house did not scream terrorist mastermind inside. But to analysts who studied it closely, the compound was extraordinarily unique, a fortress disguised as a family home. We previously discussed the challenges Bin Laden's family faced while living under his ultra-strict rules that rejected most modern conveniences. Even after evading capture, Bin Laden never relaxed those principles. The family grew its own food, burned its own trash, and carefully rationed electricity across multiple generators to disguise the fact that 16 people lived inside of the compound. Like his previous hideouts, the so-called mansion had no air conditioning. They slept on cheap foam mattresses, walked across worn rugs, and gathered around outdated television sets. Whenever men appeared on screen, Bin Laden's wives and daughters were required to leave the room. Obsessed with outside news, Bin Laden worked around his discomfort with uncovered women on television by pulling up the channel guide on the screen to obscure the journalists' faces. Several bedrooms included small kitchens and bathrooms, while one first floor doubled as a classroom, complete with a whiteboard, markers, and Arabic textbooks for the homeschooled children living there. Inside the compound walls, a vegetable garden, 100 chickens, rabbits, and even a cow supplied most of the family's food. Bin Laden's grandchildren competed in gardening contests for small prizes. Twice a year, a neighboring farmer was paid to enter the compound and plant the next season's crops. His final visit came just days before the American raid. During all his years working there, the gardener never realized he was tending the backyard of the world's most hunted man. Life inside the hideout was designed to be as self-contained and self-sufficient as possible in order to minimize contact with the outside world. The satellite television was a necessary evil for a man still attempting to micromanage the world's most notorious terror organization. Phone lines and internet service were considered too easy to track. As a result, the 2 brothers who served as Bin Laden's only points of contact with the outside world had to travel more than an hour away just to use a public payphone. The first major break in the Bin Laden case came in January 2004 with the capture of Hassan Ghul in northern Iraq. in his possession were 2 CDs filled with documents and a notebook containing names and phone numbers. Historian Peter Bergen writes that Ghoul sang like a Tweety bird. He opened up right away and was cooperative from the outset, at least according to a CIA official. Ghoul told Kurdish interrogators that bin Laden was likely hiding in northwestern Pakistan with a minimal security detail and was constantly accompanied by Abu Ahmed al-Kuwaiti, whom he described as bin Laden's closest assistant and the man responsible for moving messages on his behalf. Al-Kuwaiti was already familiar to intelligence agencies. Under torture, interrogators had previously pressed the name out of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind behind 9/11. Although Mohammed admitted to knowing the courier, he insisted there was no connection between al-Kuwaiti and al-Qaeda. Now, 1 year later, a U.S. official told the Associated Press that investigators had found the linchpin. In 2005, another man broke under torture and revealed that the courier regularly delivered messages from the head of al-Qaeda every couple of months. With multiple leads pointing in the same direction, the United States worked closely with allied intelligence agencies, unofficially known as the Six Eyes, in order to determine the true identity of the Kuwaiti. Eventually, an undisclosed allied nation identified him as Sheikh Abu Ahmed, a Pakistani man born in Kuwait. Even with a name, however, finding someone who does not want to be found is like searching for a needle in a haystack. Bergen explains that the next big break in the case came in June 2010 when the Kuwaiti made changes in the way he communicated on his cell phone that suddenly opened up the possibility of tracking the location of his phone. Soon, the U.S. National Security Agency was able to trace the Kuwaiti's cell phone to the large western Pakistani city of Peshawar. But the courier practiced very good operational security and would turn off his phone and remove its battery far from where he was living in Abbotabad. On one of his occasional visits to Peshawar, CIA agents on the ground tracked the Kuwaiti and followed his distinctive white Jeep 2.5 hours drive to the east to where he was living in a compound in Abbotabad. Living there too, as we of course now know, was Osama Bin Laden. The patience required to uncover bin Laden's whereabouts was remarkable. Barack Obama entered office in 2009, inheriting the war on terror from George W. Bush. Although Bush left both Iraq and Afghanistan unresolved, his inability to bring bin Laden to justice almost certainly haunted his presidency. Bush later distanced himself from politics, staying true to his promise that when I get out of here, I'm getting off the stage, while adding that there should only be one person in the spotlight at a time. Obama stepped directly into that spotlight. Time magazine reported that Obama's first order to his new CIA director Leon Panetta in 2009 was to make the killing or capture of Osama the top priority of the war against al-Qaeda. That directive grew out of Obama's controversial campaign pledge that if we have Osama bin Laden in our sights and the Pakistani government is unable or unwilling to take him out, then we have to act, and we will take him out. We will kill bin Laden. We will crush al-Qaeda. That has to be our biggest national security priority. Obama followed through relentlessly, instructing his team to come brief him every Tuesday at 4:30 on the hunt for bin Laden, even if there's nothing new to report. Whenever the investigation stalled, he pushed them for 4 or 5 new ideas about how to locate him. As it turned out, Panetta's CIA didn't need many new ideas. Instead, it benefited enormously from the patience shown during the Bush administration's surveillance of al-Kuwaiti. With no better leads available, investigators deliberately avoided arresting him or raising suspicion, hoping he would eventually lead them directly to the world's most wanted fugitive. Once agents tracked al-Kuwaiti's white Jeep to the Abbotabad compound, the CIA immediately began asking questions. Who puts up a privacy wall around a third-story patio? How could a courier afford a compound this large? Why burn all the trash? Looking back, those questions make it difficult to understand how nearby residents never became suspicious, especially considering that the compound sat near Pakistan's equivalent of West Point, the Pakistan Military Academy. Former CIA Deputy Director Michael Morrell later told Politico that when he first heard the details of the compound, the hair on the back of his neck literally stood up. Nobody said aloud that bin Laden might be there, he recalled, but everyone was thinking it. As the CIA closed in, analysts documented the compound's strange characteristics. No windows facing outward, no internet, no phone service, and no garbage collection. In an area with little serious crime, the walls were unusually high and topped with barbed wire. The evidence remained circumstantial, but compelling enough for Panetta to brief the president and describe the compound as the best lead since Tora Bora. Determined to avoid the intelligence failures that helped justify the Iraq War, Obama's top counterterrorism advisor instructed the CIA to build the strongest possible case that the compound was not bin Laden's hideout. The best counter-argument analysts could produce was that a dog reportedly lived on the property, something many fundamentalist Muslims considered unclean. Even that theory collapsed under scrutiny, since bin Laden himself had reportedly kept guard dogs while living in Sudan during the early 1990s. Almost immediately, the CIA established a nearby safe house in order to conduct what is known as a pattern of life analysis on the compound's residents. Bergen writes that analysts initially observed only the families of the two couriers. Over time, however, they realized there was a third family living inside the compound whose members never seemed to leave. Monitoring the movement of this third family on the compound and the number of garments hung up to dry on clotheslines indicated that this family consisted of several adults and at least 9 children, all living in the main building. Despite remaining hidden for nearly a decade, bin Laden still lived with extreme caution. Drone footage and surveillance occasionally spotted a tall man pacing in tight circles through the garden like a prisoner walking in a prison yard. The CIA eventually gave him a nickname, the Pacer. By January 2011, the Obama administration had begun actively planning military operations, bringing William H. McRaven into the process. Confident in his operators, McRaven assured the president that we do this every night. We do it about 25 times a year in Iraq and about 10 to 12 times a night in Afghanistan. But they never did it in Pakistan. There were 3 options. First, alert Pakistani authorities and allow their military to arrest whoever lived inside that compound. Second, inform Pakistan in advance that an American raid was coming and hope no one sympathetic to the Taliban tipped off the residents. Third, tell Pakistan nothing. Violate its airspace with heavily armed Black Hawk helicopters and carry out the mission alone. Without warning, Pakistani radar operators would likely assume the unidentified aircraft were enemy combatants, part of a coup attempt, or perhaps even a sophisticated terror attack intended to spark another war with India. The fact that the Obama administration chose the third option says everything about the level of trust they had in the Pakistani government. 17 secret meetings took place throughout February. No read-aheads, no cameras, no public schedules, they were disguised simply as Mickey Mouse meetings. Ironically, after news of the raid broke, the Walt Disney Company rushed to trademark the phrase SEAL Team 6, leading critics to wonder whether the Mouse House was attempting to profit from bin Laden's death. During the early planning stages, operational security became paramount. Morell later revealed that Obama ended the first major meeting with two very specific orders. First, find out whatever the hell is going on inside that compound. Second, don't tell anyone. Don't share this with anyone. This is CIA and this group in the White House, and that's it. Nobody else. No Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs. No Secretary of State. No Attorney General and Director of the FBI. Nobody. Even the contractors who built the scale model used by the raiding team had no idea what they were constructing. Only after the compound appeared on the front page of the New York Times following the raid did they realize what they had spent hundreds of hours building. The team operated under those conditions for 8 long months. That deliberate pace can be viewed in 2 ways. On one hand, carefully double and triple checking every detail increased the likelihood of success. Given the difficulty involved, the bin Laden raid stands as one of the most successful military operations ever conducted. On the other hand, bin Laden lived 8 months longer than he otherwise might have. Had he successfully orchestrated another 9/11 style attack during that period, the consequences could have been catastrophic. Thankfully, nothing of that scale occurred. Evidence uncovered after the raid instead pointed to an increasingly frustrated terrorist leader who had been sidelined by his own organization. It likely did not help that both the Bush and Obama administrations had systematically eliminated senior al-Qaeda leaders through drone strikes and raids, including bin Laden's son, Saad bin Laden, in 2009. Bergen writes that bin Laden was eager to memorialize the 9/11 attacks with another spectacular one. He told his deputies that killing President Barack Obama was a high priority. But he also had General David Petraeus, the then commander in Afghanistan, in his sights. Bin Laden told his team not to bother with plots against Vice President Joe Biden, whom he considered totally unprepared for the post of president. He also mused about doing a TV interview with CBS, which he regarded as the least biased of the American TV channels. At the same time, bin Laden struggled to understand the Arab Spring, which briefly appeared to validate President Bush's belief that democratizing Iraq could trigger a domino effect across the Middle East. For a moment, it seemed as though authoritarian regimes might genuinely collapse beneath a wave of democratic reform. But the optimism surrounding the Arab Spring quickly faded, becoming yet another disappointment for believers in democratic peace theory. The al-Qaeda leader had also grown resentful that he was no longer the feared guerrilla fighter of his youth, the man who once stood on the front lines against the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. As groups like ISIS shifted towards indiscriminate mass slaughter, bin Laden remained strangely obsessed with al-Qaeda's public image and the idea that the organization still retained some level of moral legitimacy in the Muslim world. Bergen notes that in a memo to his top aide, he warned that al-Qaeda's branch in Yemen should be very careful about possibly using poison during their operations, suggesting that the use of such chemical weapons might damage their reputation in the media and in the eyes of the public. That concern over public perception became so intense that during his final weeks alive, bin Laden reportedly held family meetings to discuss completely rebranding al-Qaeda, possibly even renaming the organization to make it appear more closely associated with Islam itself. Even a superficial rebrand, he believed, might force newspapers and television networks to frame the conflict in a way that emphasized Muslims being killed by the United States and its allies. None of this should earn bin Laden any sympathy. As David Ignatius observed, to the end of his life, bin Laden wanted to kill Americans, thought of how he could do it, specifically wanted to kill President Obama. It's amazing that on the run, in hiding in these remote places, he was honest enough about what had happened that he admitted to himself that in many ways Al-Qaeda had failed, to the point that he talks about changing the name of the organization to something different that won't have such bad connotations. As SEAL Team 6 trained for the impending raid, bin Laden struggled simply to maintain his isolated existence. Since arriving in Abbotabad, he had relied almost entirely on two brothers for survival. They alone were permitted to leave the compound, delivering messages, coordinating with couriers like Al-Qaeda, and purchasing whatever food could not be grown inside the walls. One might assume that protecting the infamous son of one of Saudi Arabia's wealthiest families would be financially rewarding. It wasn't. Despite the enormous risks they faced, including enduring 90-degree heat without air conditioning, bin Laden paid each brother only $100 a month. By early 2011, both men had reportedly submitted their resignations, though they agreed to remain temporarily until replacements could be found. The situation created another problem for bin Laden. One of the brothers' names was tied to the property itself, forcing the increasingly paranoid terrorist leader to consider not only replacing his guards, but potentially abandoning the compound altogether. In the end, bin Laden's isolation from the battlefield, the devastating impact of American drone strikes on Al-Qaeda's leadership, and the growing dysfunction inside the compound itself meant that the long delay between discovery and action did not result in any major threat to global security. Four options for the raid were presented to President Barack Obama. The first called for two Northrop B-2 Spirit bombers to each drop 16 2,000-pound bombs on the compound. Once neighboring homes were factored in, planners estimated the strike could kill anywhere from 50 to 200 people. The second option involved a small experimental drone, something resembling the fictional hunter-killer used to assassinate Leto Atreides in the Dune saga. Weighing less than a dozen pounds, the tiny flying robot would target only the pacer. The third option was more familiar, a larger armed drone, similar to those the United States had already used repeatedly inside Pakistani airspace. The fourth, and ultimately chosen option, involved two stealth helicopters flying 162 miles while evading Pakistani radar. The mission? Enter the compound, kill or capture bin Laden, gather any intelligence they could find, and escape before the Pakistani military arrived demanding to know why an unauthorized American military operation was taking place inside of their country. William McRaven was given 3 weeks to prepare SEAL Team 6. While people often imagine that preparation was non-stop rehearsals of elite combat tactics, much of it involved mundane but critical legal and logistical questions. One team member even asked the unit's lawyer whether they had been assigned an illegal assassination mission. The lawyer responded bluntly, "If he is naked with his hands up, you're not going to engage him." That guidance aligned with the president's instructions. The mission's objective was to capture bin Laden if possible, but if he resisted in any way, the SEALs were authorized to use lethal force. McRaven named the operation Neptune's Spear, likely aware that if Hollywood ever adapted the mission, filmmakers would gravitate towards the imagery of the Roman god Neptune and his trident, the symbol of the SEALs themselves. That, of course, was not the Walt Disney Company's first instinct when it rushed to trademark the phrase SEAL Team 6. Even Disney, however, could not compete with Kathryn Bigelow's Zero Dark 30, which ensured that the defining Hollywood depiction of the raid would not be named after either the operation or the unit that carried it out. The rehearsals took place in Nevada because the terrain, elevation, and climate closely matched Abbotabad. Planners believed they had roughly 30 minutes to get in and out before Pakistani forces responded. Despite months of preparation, analysts still could not agree whether the pacer was actually bin Laden. Some estimated there was a 95% probability. Others, especially officials shaped by the intelligence failures leading up to the Iraq War, warned the odds were closer to 40 or 60%. Politics inevitably hangs over every presidential decision. Defense Secretary Robert Gates warned Obama that President Jimmy Carter's failed hostage rescue mission in Iran had contributed directly to his becoming a one-term president. In other words, Gates was asking Obama to reverse the equation. If there was a 60% chance bin Laden was inside the compound, there was also a 40% chance he was not. Was Obama willing to gamble his presidency on a coin flip that could potentially trigger a war with nuclear-armed Pakistan? To improve the odds as much as possible, the SEALs identified April 30th and May 1st as the best nights for the raid. Both would be moonless, making it harder to visibly detect the helicopters as they crossed Pakistani airspace. Obama spent 3 hours alone in the White House treaty room, pacing back and forth, mentally working through every possible outcome. The next morning at 8:10 a.m., he met briefly with his national security team and simply announced, "It's a go." Oddly enough, the final unresolved issue before the raid had nothing to do with helicopters, intelligence, or military strategy. It was the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Ben Rhodes once described the events as the kind of ritual that you complain about while desperately seeking an invite. Every spring, journalists, celebrities, and politicians gathered under the pretense of fundraising for scholarships, though in reality the evening functioned as equal parts comedy roast and political theater. In 2011, the first of the 2 moonless nights selected for the operation landed on the exact same evening as the dinner. That created a serious logistical problem. If the raid went wrong and senior officials suddenly disappeared from the ballroom, Washington's media elite would notice immediately. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton cut through the debate with a blunt assessment: bleep the White House Correspondents' Dinner. In the end, however, the operation was pushed to the following night. The delay created one of history's stranger coincidences. Obama stepped onto the stage that evening fully aware that within 24 hours he might be announcing the death of Osama bin Laden. In hindsight, the performance carries an entirely different weight. Just weeks earlier, Obama had released his long-form birth certificate, and during the dinner he mocked Donald Trump, who at the time was dominating headlines with conspiracy theories and his role on The Celebrity Apprentice. Obama joked about Trump's reality show dilemmas involving Lil Jon, Meatloaf, and Gary Busey before landing the punchline: "These are the kinds of decisions that would keep me up at night." The audience laughed, but the line lands differently now. Obama knew that the following night he would make a decision that could finally close a chapter America had been living through since September 12, 2001. At 2 p.m. on May 1st, Obama entered the Situation Room to monitor the raid in real time. Roughly 30 minutes later, around 10:30 p.m. local Pakistani time, 2 Black Hawk helicopters lifted off towards the border. On board were 23 SEALs, a Pakistani-American translator, and Cairo, a 70-pound Belgian Malawa trained for combat operations. 30 minutes later, 3 smaller Boeing CH-47 Chinook helicopters launched as the backup force. For the next 30 minutes, the Black Hawks hugged the terrain and avoided population centers, hoping to stay beneath Pakistani radar coverage. That concealment vanished once they entered Abbotabad airspace, but luck intervened. The city had been plunged into darkness by an unplanned rolling blackout. Even so, the raid was accidentally documented in real time on social media. Pakistani software engineer Sohab Attar tweeted, "Helicopter hovering above Abbotabad at 1 a.m. Is this a real event?" Shortly afterwards, he added, "A huge window shaking bang here in Abbotabad can't. I hope it's not the start of something nasty." Bergen writes that the plan was for one of the Black Hawks to hover over what was suspected to be Bin Laden's third-floor bedroom. SEALs would then fast rope onto the roof of the bedroom and surprise al-Qaeda's leader while he slept. The other Black Hawk would drop another group of SEALs onto the ground near the main building on the compound, and they would then advance up the stairs to the third-floor bedroom. The maneuver had worked flawlessly during every rehearsal in Nevada, but the mock-up had used chain-link fencing rather than the compound's towering concrete walls. Those walls trapped and intensified the helicopter's rotor wash, causing one of the Black Hawks to lose lift and crash hard inside the compound. The contingency plan, originally designed around fears that militants might fire a rocket-propelled grenade at the aircraft, called for the pilot to force the helicopter down inside the animal pen. The SEALs escaped safely after the hard landing, but the tail rotor clipped the compound wall, making the aircraft unusable for extraction. It was the first major thing to go wrong. In the Situation Room, Vice President Joe Biden reportedly began nervously fingering his rosary beads. Meanwhile, instead of hovering over the third floor as planned, the second helicopter was forced to land outside the compound. By then, the entire house was awake. Bin Laden's 2 daughters rushed upstairs to join their father. The first controlled explosion breached a first-floor doorway and was immediately met with AK-47 fire. 2 bodyguards were quickly killed, then the SEALs moved their wives and children out of the line of fire. An iron gate blocked the stairway leading to the upper floors. Advancing to the second floor triggered another gunfight and another enemy casualty. The SEALs stepped over the dead man and his loaded rifle as they continued upward. Finally, they reached the mysterious third floor. Bergen writes, Bin Laden's youngest wife saw an American soldier coming up the stairs aiming his weapon at her husband. She saw a red beam of light, but she heard no shot from the silenced weapon. Amal rushed the soldier, who shot her in the calf. She passed out on the bed. The soldiers feared the women in the room might be wearing suicide vests. They rushed forward and violently pinned them against the wall to shield the rest of the team behind them. Normally, we would never describe armed men tackling terrified, unarmed women in the middle of the night as heroic. But in this case, the action was intended to protect the rest of the assault force. Had the women been wearing explosives, the first operators through the door would have absorbed the blast and shielded the men behind them. The man known as the Pacer was also down in the fighting. The SEALs attempted to identify Bin Laden using a photograph, but initially struggled because his beard had recently been dyed jet black with just for men hair dye. His daughters, however, immediately confirmed his identity. Bergen notes that Bin Laden died without putting up a fight. They found his guns in his bedroom, an AK-47 and a pistol. They were sitting on a high shelf above the frame of the door that opened into the room. The chambers of both guns were empty. One member of the team later recalled thinking he hadn't even prepared a defense. Confident in their identification, the SEALs radioed the code word Geronimo back to command. Rhodes later admitted that despite serving as Deputy National Security Advisor, he initially had no idea what the word meant. Moments later, Obama exhaled and quietly told the room, "We got him." From the helicopter crash in the animal pen to bin Laden's death, the operation had taken just 9 minutes. The first phase of the mission had succeeded. Now the Situation Room shifted to a new concern: getting the operators home alive. Pakistan had never been informed of the raid. The explosions and gunfire had awakened the surrounding area, which happened to sit only a few miles from both police and military training facilities. McRaven, the commander overseeing the mission, reminded the room, "We've got SEALs on the ground without a ride." Planners had estimated they had roughly 30 minutes before local responders arrived and a firefight with Pakistani forces became unavoidable. With the compound secured, the team released Cairo, the military dog, to search for hidden explosives and concealed rooms. Meanwhile, the remaining operators began grabbing anything that might contain useful intelligence about ongoing al-Qaeda plots. As McRaven urged the team to move faster, the SEALs on the ground requested additional time to process what one operator described as a crap ton of computers and electronic equipment on the second floor. They finally emerged 40 minutes into the raid, 10 minutes behind schedule, carrying 10 hard drives, 5 computers, and nearly 100 thumb drives and disks. Concerned neighbors had begun gathering near the compound gates, but the Pakistani-American translator kept them back by insisting, "This is government business." He then added, "If you want to stay alive, don't come. Go back to your house." Bergen writes that the SEALs were on target at Abbotabad for 48 minutes, 18 minutes longer than planned. As a result, they had gathered an immense haul of intelligence, but the city was now full of blue police lights converging on the compound. It was time to go. The SEALs also needed to prevent the crashed Black Hawk stealth technology from falling into the wrong hands. They rigged the downed helicopter with explosives and set a timer to destroy it after extraction. Bergen continues, "Just as the downed chopper was about to explode, the backup Chinook was coming in and was very close to landing. At the last second, the Boeing CH-47 Chinook was forced to break away as the exploding Black Hawk erupted into a 150-foot mushroom cloud." Bergen writes that the Chinook came in to land and pick up the remaining SEALs on the ground, as well as bin Laden's DNA samples and all the intelligence materials that were retrieved at the compound. Bin Laden's body was placed on the surviving Black Hawk. That way, if the Pakistanis mobilized their air force and shot down one of the helicopters, there was still evidence that bin Laden was dead. He continues, "One Chinook flew a direct route back toward Afghanistan, while the surviving Black Hawk had to detour in order to refuel from another backup Chinook. During the return flight, warning systems lit up inside the helicopter, a sign that Pakistani radar had begun tracking the aircraft." Luck once again favored the Americans. A Pakistani General Dynamics F-16 Fighting Falcon was reportedly operating nearby. Had it intercepted the helicopters, the SEALs would have stood little chance in an aerial engagement. Around the same time, Obama briefed his Pakistani counterpart about the raid. Whether that conversation played any role in allowing the helicopters to safely return to Afghanistan remains unknown. Although Pakistan was furious that its sovereignty had been violated, the fact that bin Laden had been living comfortably in one of the country's largest cities forced officials to bite their tongues and grudgingly acknowledge the success of the operation. Pakistan's official after-action report, which interviewed more than 200 individuals, including members of bin Laden's family and senior ISI officials, proved deeply embarrassing. As the Brookings Institute later summarized, the commission did not blame any single individual. Instead, it concluded that the failure was systemic, the product of an elite establishment that was either staggeringly incompetent or compromised by extremist sympathizers within their own ranks. In effect, the report validated the American assessment that Pakistani authorities could not be trusted with the intelligence surrounding the raid. Safely back in Afghanistan, McRaven personally confirmed that the body recovered from Abbotabad was in fact Osama Bin Laden. A CIA operative at the scene deadpanned, "I guess I'm out of a bleeping job." DNA evidence would later be used to confirm the identity, but McRaven also relied on a more old-school method. He asked a nearby soldier who happened to stand 6'2" to lie down beside the body. When the soldier came up roughly 2 inches shorter than the 6'4" Bin Laden, McRaven informed the Situation Room that he was 99% sure they had their target. Obama, still fresh off his performance at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, reportedly joked, "Let me get this straight. We had $60 million for a helicopter and you didn't have $10 for a tape measure?" Initially, the administration considered delaying any public announcement because of the slim chance they could be wrong. But after the final photographs of Bin Laden circulated through the Situation Room, officials decided to address the nation that same night. Before speaking publicly, Obama personally called both George W. Bush and Bill Clinton to inform them that their white whale had finally been hunted down. Then, from the East Room of the White House, the president stepped to the podium and informed the nation that the United States had conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. That night, the only major sporting event underway was a game between the Philadelphia Phillies and the New York Mets. The longtime rivals were locked in a tense 8th inning when news of bin Laden's death spread through the crowd. Fans from both sides suddenly united in a thunderous chant of USA. As the game moved into the 9th inning of a 1-1 tie, television cameras repeatedly cut to spectators staring down at their phones, learning the news in real time, and processing emotions that had been building since September 11, 2001. Back at the base in Afghanistan, Cairo, the lone K-9 member of the raid, celebrated the successful mission with a well-deserved filet mignon. The following day, bin Laden's body received Islamic burial prayers before being unceremoniously buried at sea somewhere in the Arabian Sea. The unmarked, watery grave ensured that his remains could not become a shrine or pilgrimage site for extremists. The respect shown towards the body was also deliberate. American officials understood that incidences such as the torture and abuse of prisoners at Abu Ghraib and the leaked cell phone footage of Saddam Hussein's execution had fueled outrage and unrest across the Middle East. Likewise, Obama resisted calls to publicly release graphic photographs showing bin Laden's fatal wounds. From there, attention shifted towards the intelligence recovered during the raid. By that point, the war on terror had evolved far beyond a simple hunt for bin Laden. It had become a sprawling global struggle against decentralized extremist movements. Some of the first information released publicly involved details seemingly intended to discredit bin Laden's carefully cultivated image as a holy warrior. Among the discoveries was a significant collection of pornographic material. While revealing such details may appear sensationalistic, officials understood the symbolic damage it could inflict within parts of the Islamic world where modesty and religious discipline are highly valued. In other words, the allegation that bin Laden consumed large amounts of porn while living in isolation with multiple wives inside his self-designed compound directly undermined the image he projected as a devout religious figure. Investigators also uncovered materials that proved operationally valuable in dismantling al-Qaeda networks. Other discoveries were simply surreal. The Bin Laden family reportedly owned DVD copies of Cars, Chicken Little, and Ice Age: Dawn of the Dinosaurs, along with video games such as Half-Life, Super Mario Bros., Yoshi's Island, Final Fantasy VII, and Counter-Strike, a game in which players often assume the role of American counter-terrorism operators. Among bin Laden's books and documentaries were numerous works about himself, further reinforcing perceptions of his narcissism. He also possessed several texts rooted in anti-Semitic conspiracy theories. Historian Bill Rogia argued that it was important for him to understand his enemy and their way of thinking, suggesting that bin Laden may have studied American culture and politics far more carefully than many Americans had studied him. While it is a difficult subject, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowery@gmail.com or find us on Bluesky beneath the handle EmpiresPod. If you'd like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, which you promised to at the beginning of the episode, and, of course, spreading the word.